There has never been a draft in sports like the 1983 NFL Draft. The class consisted of 6 first-round quarterbacks, 42 Pro Bowlers, and a jaw-dropping 8 Hall of Famers. There have been impactful drafts since, but nothing compares to '83. That draft, especially the opening round, changed the NFL landscape forever. But a stacked draft class like that doesn't come without controversy. Top picks refusing to play for the teams that drafted them, rumors being spread about prospects, and even the NFL stepping in to block trades set the table for the craziest draft ever. And it all started with a young quarterback from Stanford named John Elway. On a Cardinal team that was the very definition of mid, Elway was clearly a premier NFL prospect. He threw for 9,349 passing yards, 77 touchdowns, and 39 interceptions during his college career. The guy had it all: a great college resume, a deep family history of football, and a sturdy 6'3" frame that signaled he could handle a more physical era of the NFL. To this day, he's regarded by many scouts as the greatest college prospect ever. The perfect first overall pick for a lucky team. The problem was, he didn't want to be the first overall pick. You see, that pick belonged to the Baltimore Colts, who had embarrassed themselves over the previous 2 seasons with a 2-22-1 record. Their owner, Bob Irsay, even took over play calling at one point. They were so dysfunctional. And after going winless in '82, they were in desperate need for an elite player. But while being the number 1 pick is a special opportunity, Elway, his father John Sr., and legendary agent Marvin Demoff were far from enthusiastic about playing for the Colts, and in true Magic Johnson fashion said,
"I'm not gonna be here."
Typically, top prospects are out of luck. You play for the team that drafts you. But Elway was not a typical player, and that year was not a typical draft. Some guys are just good at everything, and Elway in particular was also a fantastic baseball player. So, by 1983, the Stanford QB had already been drafted into the MLB and was a member of the New York Yankees.
Baseball, how good I would have been, I'm not sure, but I think I would have been able to give it a pretty good run.
The Yankees had big plans for Elway, with owner George Steinbrenner wanting him as the starting right fielder within a couple of years. And like every other player drafted at that time, Elway could also choose to play for the upstart USFL, a league trying to rival the NFL. With that leverage, Elway fired first. He and his camp outright said that he would play for the Yankees if Baltimore selected him. But Colts GM Ernie Accorsi didn't roll over. He believed in Elway's ability as much as anyone and didn't want to give up that kind of talent. He's one of the most talented quarterbacks I've ever seen, and I'm not trading away the next Johnny Unitas. I'm not going to my grave being known as the guy who traded away the next Johnny Unitas. I'm not doing it. The Colts received several trade offers, but initially they weren't seeing anything that moved the needle for a trade. However, there was one offer that broke through, and it came from the Los Angeles Raiders. Raiders owner Al Davis was ready to sell the farm for Elway, offering 3 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks to the Colts, including a top 10 pick. Deal accepted. The Colts would get a chance to draft one of the other top QBs in the draft along with other key pieces, and Elway would get to play on the West Coast. Everyone's happy, right? Wrong. One man stood in the way: NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle. Now, the details are murky, but the general consensus is that Rozelle vetoed the trade due to his well-documented issues with Al Davis. The two had battled in courtrooms for years due to Davis moving the Raiders to LA, and they had clashed before that in the AFL-NFL merger. Voiding the trade was arguably the best way to get one over on Davis. So, entering draft day, the rights to Elway still belonged to the Colts. To back up their stance on taking or trading Elway, Accorsi in Baltimore made the quickest pick in NFL history, selecting him just 9 seconds after the draft began. In response, Elway spoke at a press conference and made his situation clear. "As I stand here right now, I'm playing baseball." Worried about a potential debacle, Colts owner Bob Irsay took matters into his own hands. Overriding his GM, Irsay began negotiating with the Denver Broncos about a potential deal. The Colts had little leverage to begin with, but Elway's press conference meant that they had to take whatever they could get. Baltimore's haul was offensive tackle Chris Hinton, who was the Broncos' first-round pick in '83, as well as Denver backup QB Mark Herman, and their first-round pick in the '84 draft. To say they got away with robbery would be an understatement. Elway joined the Broncos and began a storied NFL career that included 9 Pro Bowls and 2 Super Bowl rings. The Colts organization, on the other hand, would not make the playoffs until 1987, and only 3 times total during Elway's playing days. But a legendary draft isn't held up by the greatness of the number 1 pick alone, and it didn't take long for the next great one to get selected. After the mania that was the first pick, the Los Angeles Rams were up next. Los Angeles was in a far different situation than the Colts, but they still needed someone that would up their win total quickly. So they bet on SMU star running back Eric Dickerson, and the rest was history. Dickerson is arguably the greatest number 2 selection ever. He broke nearly every rookie rushing record in the '83 season with 1,808 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns before setting the single-season NFL rushing record with 2,105 yards the next year. That mark still stands today, and Dickerson was an easy first-ballot Hall of Fame choice after his playing career. It's extremely rare for a draft to put out 5+ Hall of Famers, but it's nearly unfathomable to have 5 in the first 15 picks. The next after Dickerson was the 6th overall pick, Jim Covert, who was one of the NFL's best linemen for a decade. Covert was the type of hard-nosed player your dad would love, pancaking defenders week after week. As a star of Chicago's Super Bowl winning team in '85, he wrote himself into the history books and the hearts of Bears fans. But as great as Covert was, the number 9 pick and fellow lineman Bruce Matthews had him beat. The Houston Oilers icon made a jaw-dropping 14 Pro Bowls in 14 consecutive seasons. At the time, that was tied for the NFL record for Pro Bowl appearances, and his versatility was just as impressive. Matthews started games at every position on the line over his career. Now we'll get to Dan Marino and Jim Kelly soon, but don't forget about Darryl Green. The last pick of the first round, Green went to Washington and became an unforgettable icon for fans in burgundy and gold. Green is the definition of a one-team legend. He played 20 seasons for Washington. Very few players even make it a decade in the league, so to make it 2 with one team is truly a one-of-a-kind career. He holds several league records, including being the oldest DB to ever hit the field at 42 years old, the most games ever played by a defensive player with 295 appearances, and he brought down his final NFL interception when he was 41, which is still a record today. Green notched 7 Pro Bowls and 4 All-Pro selections, recording 3 interceptions or more in 12 different seasons. He's also widely regarded as one of the fastest players to ever lace him up. And the only Hall of Famer from the '83 draft that wasn't selected in the first round was legendary Bears defensive end Richard Dent. Dent wasn't taken until the 8th round, but had the career of a top 10 pick. He was an elite pass rusher in the mid-'80s, totaling 34.5 sacks over 1984 and '85. Of course, those regular season sacks were a huge part of what lifted the Bears to their first and only Super Bowl title, but he was a game breaker in the Super Bowl as well. The Bears icon was named the Super Bowl MVP after he forced 2 fumbles along with 1.5 sacks. To put it in perspective, only 9 Super Bowls in history have had a defensive player named the MVP. Dent was just a menace, crossing the 10-sack mark in 8 seasons and making QBs remember his name in the process. When he retired with 137.5 sacks, he ranked 3rd on the all-time sack list, alongside names like Reggie White and Bruce Smith. And speaking of Bruce Smith, let's get to his quarterback, Jim Kelly. Kelly would go on to have an exceptional NFL career, but he didn't even spend the first few years of his pro career in the league. Instead, he chose the USFL over the NFL due to his hatred of the cold. No, that's not a joke. A college star for the Hurricanes in sunny Miami, Kelly had his own issues with certain teams. Kelly wanted to avoid cold weather, so teams like the Green Bay Packers and Buffalo Bills were absolute no-goes.
I don't want to play for the Green Bay Packers, and I sure don't want to play for the Buffalo Bills.
And initially, it seemed like he would dodge the frosty bullet. The Bills had the number 12 pick and selected a tight end instead. But Kelly didn't realize Buffalo had another pick in the first round at 14. And when they went on the clock, their draft sheet read QB Jim Kelly, Miami. To say that Kelly was heartbroken is an understatement, despite him telling the public that he figured Buffalo would draft him.
I really literally cry. I just had tears. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me.
The Hurricane star figured he was stuck with Buffalo, but what followed is one of the most controversial plot twists of the '83 draft. Kelly was in the Bills' front office discussing his rookie deal when a secretary allowed Bruce Allen, general manager of the USFL's Chicago BLITZ, to talk to the QB on the telephone. The message was clear: get out of that building, come talk to us. And Kelly did. While Allen and the BLITZ were the first team to reach the young prospect, the USFL allowed the QB to choose whatever team he wanted to play for in order to convince him to join their league. Kelly chose the Houston Gamblers and began his pro career in the USFL. As a gambler, he put up video game-like numbers. Kelly threw for 9,842 yards and 83 touchdowns in 2 seasons. But the team folded heading into the 1985 year. He initially signed with the New Jersey Generals, but the entire USFL folded before he played for the team. So it was back to square one for Kelly, which meant going back to Buffalo. The Bills had gone 12-36 in the 3 seasons that Kelly was in the USFL, but he finally signed a contract with the Bills going into the 86 season. Even after he finally joined, the Bills struggled for a couple years, but the frustration proved to be worth the wait. With Kelly, the Bills would win 6 divisional championships in 8 seasons. More famously, or infamously, he would lead Buffalo to 4 straight Super Bowls. But they'd lose all 4 to teams from the NFC East, denying Kelly the ultimate prize. But the consolation prize for Kelly was making the Hall of Fame. Kelly was always regarded as an elite QB and an icon for his decade plus with the Bills, despite him never wanting to play there in the first place. And in terms of names that are synonymous with football, Dan Marino is as big as it gets. Millions of people who don't even watch the NFL know his name. But his pro career took major setbacks before it ever started. While at Pittsburgh, Marino was a bona fide star. He played every regular season game possible for the Panthers, totaling 8,597 yards and 79 touchdowns in the process. After his stellar junior season, it seemed like a 2-horse race between him and Elway for who would be the first overall pick. But an underwhelming senior campaign took him out of that conversation. However, no one could have expected the slide that Marino had on draft day. No one, except the NFL teams themselves, that is. Marino had developed a reputation as a partier in college, but throughout the draft process, rumors began to spread within NFL circles that he was using drugs frequently. While there was no backing to these rumors, they were enough to scare teams from taking him. The question changed from whether he would be a top pick to if he'd be taken in the first round. When draft day hit, Marino's worst fears were initially confirmed. 5 other quarterbacks were selected before him, the 5th being Ken O'Brien, who was a Division II player.
Jets take their first round selection, quarterback Ken O'Brien.
Former broadcaster Bill Hillgrove was with Marino on draft day and said he got visibly ill when O'Brien was drafted by the New York Jets. Even his hometown Pittsburgh Steelers passed on him after seemingly being gifted him at the 21st pick. It appeared as if Marino would drop out of the first round, but an unexpected team swooped in with the 27th pick, the Miami Dolphins. Legendary head coach Don Shula had never met Marino, but he believed in him and the Dolphins' ability to take a potential problem child and win. The best part is, Marino was never a problem. Instead, he was arguably the best quarterback of his generation. The Dolphins were led by Marino to a Super Bowl appearance in just his 2nd NFL season, although they fell short to the 49ers. Over his 17 seasons, he only had a losing record as a starter twice. Marino was the first QB to throw for 5,000 yards in a season, signaling a major change in how an NFL offense would operate. Year after year, the kid from Pittsburgh kept the Dolphins competitive despite coaching and franchise changes. By the time he retired in 1999, Marino was the all-time leader in passing yards, passing completions, passing touchdowns, as well as the single-season record holder for yards and touchdowns. Those marks would eventually be surpassed by one quarterback or another, but Marino's legacy will never be forgotten. 1-time MVP, 5-time NFL passing leader, and 9-time Pro Bowler. The '83 draft produced so many NFL stars that there are literally too many standout players to list. The draft's 42 Pro Bowlers is the most in NFL history, and there's probably a few of those that should have made it to the Hall of Fame as well. But that's for a different video. Just know that the '83 draft is the standard by which all drafts are measured. And that's not just in terms of the quality of players. It's probably also the most entertaining and controversial draft ever. 40 years have passed since it occurred, and we've never seen another draft like it. And for more of the best NFL content on YouTube, team up with BLITZ. Like, subscribe, and check out some of our other videos.